see who this person is that they swapped for and the severity that it caused and the risk to the United States for this person to be released. Okay. Now, like I stated, this article is coming from the New York Times as far as who he is. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, who is Victor Bout, the arms dealer? Okay. Victor Bout has been accused of supplying arms to Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and rebels in Rwanda. His exploits helped inspire a 2005 film, The Lord of the War, that starred Nicolas Cage. Now, this is a photo of him, of Victor Bout, or AKA the Merchant of Death. Victor Bout, a notorious Russian arms dealer. This is when he arrived in Bangkok in 2010. Okay. Shortly after his conviction in 2011 on charges including conspiring to kill American citizens, the Russian arm dealer Victor Bout relayed a defiant message through his lawyer as he faced the prospect of decades in prison. Mr. Bout, his lawyer said, believes this is not the end. More than a decade later, Mr. Bout, 55, has been freed despite serving less than half of his 25-year prison sentence. He was exchanged on Thursday for the American basketball player Brittany Griner, who has been in prison in Russia for 10 months. Russian officials had pressed for Bout's return since his conviction by the New York jury on 4 counts that including conspiring to kill American citizens. Prosecutors said he had agreed to sell anti-aircraft weapons to drug enforcement informants who were posing as armed buyers for the Revolutionary Armed Forces in Colombia. I mean, this dude is no joke. You gonna trade a arms dealer that has conspired to kill American citizens for a basketball player? Really? Putin played you, Biden. But let's get back into this article so you all can understand who this man is. The Attorney General at the time, Eric Holder, called Mr. Bout, pronounced Boot. Okay, Mr. Boot, I've been mispronouncing it. One of the world's most prolific arms dealers. I mean, you don't get the nickname of Merchant of Death for just anything. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, to get that nickname, you have proven yourself that that's who you are. Okay, let's get back. Mr. Boot became notorious among American intelligence officials, earning him the nickname Merchant of Death as he evaded capture for years. His exploit helped inspire the 2005 film, The Lord of War, that starred Nicolas Cage as the character. After Mr. Boot, he was probably the highest profile Russian in U.S. custody, and the prisoner Russian had campaigned that most vicariously to have returned. His return to Russia is likely to reunite debate over the wisdom of engaging in prisoner exchanges for Americans the United States considered wrongfully detained, as was the case with Miss Griner, and is with another American still imprisoned in Russia, Paul Wilhelm, a former Marine. Well, see, this speaks to the negotiation skills of the Biden administration. If you're going to trade the Merchant of Death, you better get 2 for 1. Whelan should have came home also. Why is Whelan still in prison after over 4 years? Okay. And an American veteran, Marine veteran at that. Okay, back to who this Mr. Boot is. In interviews with journalists, Mr. Boot has repeatedly denied accusations that he worked for Russian intelligence agencies. But Mark Galeotto, an expert with Russian security devices, said there were strong signs Mr. Boot's education, his social and professional networks, and his logistical skills that he is a member, or at least was close collaboration with, Russia's military intelligence agency known as GRU. That is also the opinion of the US and other authorities, and it explains the reasons Russia was so astutely campaigning to get him back. Of course, if you got your number one guy, the merchant of death, in prison, and he goes carrying out securing arms to kill Americans and other people, of course you want him back. Okay? Mr. Galeotto, a lecturer on Russia and transnational crime at the University College in London, said in an interview in July, all countries try to get their citizens out of rough jurisdictions, but it is clear that it has been a particular priority for Russia in getting Victor Boot back. Mr. Boot grew up in Dushanbe, the capital of Turkmenistan, until he conscripted into Soviet military at the age of 18. After a term in the army, he studied Portuguese at the Military Institute of Foreign Languages in Moscow, a common entree to Russian intelligence service, and eventually became an officer in the Air Force. The Soviet Union broke apart not long after Mr. Boot left the military, as Russia's economy collapsed and criminal groups thrived. He moved to the United Arab Emirates and started a cargo company that grew to a fleet of 60 planes. With military supplies from the former Soviet states leaking onto the black market, his shipping empire delivered guns to rebels, militants, and terrorists all around the world, prosecutors said. In the new era of privatization in Russia, arms traffickers were able to use old Soviet-era social, military, and business networks, and to also develop shell companies to hide transactions. Mr. Boot was accused of selling weapons to Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the militants in Rwanda. According to several investigations, his U.S. indictment, he and his associates flouted arms embargoes in Sierra Leone, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Algeria, where he sold weapons to both government forces and rebels fighting them. He has no conscience. He said, I'm going to sell it to the government and I'm going to sell it to the people that's fighting them. I don't care. I'm getting paid. Now, with Russia and the Ukraine in the midst of war, and Russia is not doing very well right now, like Putin just said the other day, that he's surprised that it's lasted this long. But now you give him back the merchant of death? Really? Really? Let's get back to this article, y'all. His ability to avoid being captured added to his notoriety among Western intelligence officials. In 1995, the Taliban forced down one of his planes in Afghanistan and seized the cargo and imprisoned the crew. Mr. Bout and Russian officials somehow managed to get the crew out of the country. In 2003, he told the New York Times magazine they were extricated. And in 2012, the New Yorker reported that he said they simply escaped. And this is another photo of him. U.S. authorities finally caught up with him in Bangkok in 2018. Mr. Boot met with undercover Drug Enforcement Administration agents he believed represented rebels from Colombia's Revolutionary Armed Forces, or FARC, which the United States considers a terrorist organization until last year. When the prospective buyers told him the weapons could be used to kill American pilots, Mr. Boot's response, "We have the same enemy. But you're going to do a one-to-one trade for a basketball player for the Merchant of Death." I want that to sink in. I want you all to just don't think about any political things, any racial, any gender things, any nothing but you, the United States of America, Joe Biden is going, traded a basketball player for the Merchant of Death. Makes no sense. Let's get back to the article. Thai authorities arrested him on the spot. He was extradited to the United States in 2010 and 2 years later was sentenced to 25 years in prison. In the years since, Russia authorities have maintained Mr. Boot's innocence and brought him up as possible swap for other high-profile Americans and Ukrainian detainees held by Russia. He has been the center of the Russian campaign, "We do not abandon our own," that has cast his arrest as unfair and politically motivated. Mr. Boot exchange has been priority for Russia, a matter of honor and a matter of ruthless plagiarism, says Galatano in the Russian expert. The Russian intelligence agencies have inherited from the former Soviet KGB a culture that makes it clear to its own agents, "We will get you back." That kind of loyalty of our own is really important when you are expecting people to put themselves potentially in harm's way. Yet, the United States veteran Marine still remains behind bars in a Russian prison, while you only pull a basketball player for the Merchant of Death. You cannot make this up. I'm just saying. It was unclear whether Bout's return would further encourage Russia to arrest Westerners who can be traded. Moscow denies allegations that it intentionally arrests people to force an exchange. A Russian journalist and expert on security services, who is a senior fellow at the Center of European Policy Analysis, said that while Mr. Boot had been the highest profile Russian prisoner in America, there are many more Russians and U.S. prisoners, particularly for hacking. Okay. Russian authorities said Mr. Solotov, the Russian authorities, Mr. Solotov said, learned how to create banks of hostages in the early 2000s during the brutal war with the breakdown region of Chechnya, right after President Vladimir Putin came to power. It was a lesson they never quite forgot, referring to Russian security agency said. It makes total sense from their point of view to do the same with the U.S. Okay, so like I stated, we need to know who was traded for this. Like I stated, it doesn't matter about race, gender, any of that. When you trade, just looking at it as a whole, how much sense does this make? You are putting an American basketball player and trading this person for the Merchant of Death. Now, I've read to you all of who Victor Boot is, aka Merchant of Death. There is no way that he should have been traded for Brittany Griner. That's just my personal opinion. Putin, got over on Joe Biden. That was an unequal trade. While Whelan is still in Russian prison, and he has been there for years, and he's going to remain there, the American veteran. So anyway, everybody, I just wanted to bring this to you because, baby, I'm trying to understand it. And if somebody can understand it and explain it to me, again, Brittany Griner family, happy that you have your family member home. But Mr. Boot, he's not going to forget that he's been in prison all these years. If he was notorious before, what do you think he's going to be now? He is going to open up all kinds of whoop boom. He's going to go right back to what he was doing before, the merchant of death.